Hello everyone, this is Duskalmaka's The Gamer. I want to clarify a few things before we get started with this. This is a short story by Tony, who is the creator of Petscop. This story was written in 2009, and it does star characters named Marvin and Care. And if you've ever seen the Petscop web series, you'll recognize those names. That said, this is not canon to Petscop. It's more like this idea formulated and evolved over time into being the story about Marvin and Care that you see within the Petscop series. The next thing which I have to say about this, I apologize right now if I mispronounce things. I'm trying to be a bit more public about specific things, and I guess this is the first place which I can get started with. I have a very rare, I guess you can call it birth defect, but thankfully it doesn't affect me that much. To basically explain, if you ever notice I mispronounce things, the reason why is because my brain is slightly larger than average person's, but I still have the same amount of connective tissue. And what this means is that sometimes how I pronounce things get mixed up in my head. I was tested when I was a kid for this because I used to have a lot of trouble pronouncing things, like I would pronounce balloon as blue, or tornado as tomato. My mind just kind of automatically associates words. And as such, if you see me mispronouncing some stuff during this, I apologize. I am still working at it, and this might be good for that, but all the same. I've actually not read this story yet. It is 20 chapters long, but none of the chapters are entirely too long. I do have a gist of what it's about, but this is also a blind reading on my part. With all this said, we're going to kind of get started right through this. I'm just going to be reading in my normal voice. I might add a little bit of dramaticness to some of it, but you'll mostly just be hearing me sort of talking like this. Alright, I think that's all I want to say. Also, I have a creepy, ambient, dark music thing to play in the background as we do this. So let's go. I also will display the screen, I guess I should clarify. And now. Hello everyone. Summary or something like that. Tapers is a little story about troubled people. It's also about Tapers, the wonderful and slightly mysterious camera store, and one employee and one customer. It's probably also a story about the hopes and dreams of an elderly kidnapper and his kidnappee, an 8-year-old girl. But Tapers is perhaps a little more than that. There may be something else in there, hiding. Your guess is as good as mine. There's 20 chapters, and there's some sites here if you're curious to see them. I've also linked this in the description below if you'd rather read it yourself. So let's go. Chapter 1. Sitting close to an old school building, quietly entertaining itself, was a bench. While the school next to it seemed like from the outside like it hadn't been cleaned in ages, this bench was perfect. It wouldn't be a struggle to sit on, most of the time. There was a high demand for clean benches, usually hundreds of exhausted blobs bobbling forward at any given moment, and yet only one seat. To pass by this bench as it lied empty was a lucky sign for anybody. At this moment, as was true for the majority of the day, the bench was occupied. On one side was a small, thin man. I don't actually know who this was, and I frankly don't think it was a matter of any person's concern. On the other side, an older man, late 60s perhaps, with a considerably heavy forehead sat. His name was Marvin Mill, not a particularly happy person, but his dreams kept him going. His eyes, always wide open, moved back and forth. He was always concentrating on 2 or 3 distinct things, paying full attention to all of them and only limited by the speed of his eyeballs. Most of his attention was paid on the school behind him. It was almost the end of the school day, or so his watch was claiming. He knew this from waiting in roughly the same spot every day, regardless of health or mood. This time, however, he had the bench. He could relax for a change and watch the children. Well, that's not a good sign. Marvin was tired, as per usual. He fought hard to retain his consciousness, overwhelmed by the comfort of the one decent seat in the town. He couldn't let himself fall asleep, at least not on this particular day. Not that it was any different than the day before, but it was always worth it, and all days could have potentially been wonderful in his life. He had always enjoyed watching the children as they sprang out of the building and into their bright, sparkling buses which, due to the brightness, would reflect light into his eyes, preventing him from watching the children from that point forward. Damn those buses. They served no purpose in his mind but to separate him from his goals. However, some of them didn't ride the buses, and instead braved by foot. This was the extraordinary part. No light, nothing, just pure children. How wonderful. For this man there was but one reason for living, and it was this. He could hear the bell from where he sat. It was loud, and he was thankful for that. There was a lot to be thankful for on this day. By now, the buses had pulled up into the school, preventing him from seeing much further. His head turned away. Soon there would be children in front of him. He thought to himself. His fingers were crossed. One child came to view, then another, yet another. He sat back, moving his eyeballs back and forth, trying to concentrate on all of them. A few looked back, reacting to his glance by walking away a little faster. They recognized him from every other day. It was a mystery to them why his eyes would settle on their bodies so silently and peacefully. They imagined his thoughts, wondering to themselves what could be so intriguing about a small group of 7 to 8-year-old children. The speed at which they walked away was mostly proportional to the inappropriateness of their imagined thoughts. Marvin's ears were ready, as they often were. Behind one group of kids was a small girl, considerably shorter than the others, but decidedly in the same age group. The small group in front of her was talking loudly and quite obnoxiously, laughing at what was probably something silly. This girl behind them, though, wasn't talking at all. Marvin didn't appreciate this silence. It didn't fit. That group of 6 or 7 kids, still enjoying themselves, began to walk a notch faster. The little girl behind them didn't do this. In fact, the opposite happened. She walked slower, and her head turned steadily towards the old man. At the sight of this, something strange happened. The man's eyes miraculously stopped moving. For the first time in years, he was concentrating on one thing. One single thing in this entire world. Not 2, not 3, not 4, and certainly not 5. A number that he had always despised. The girl came to a full stop. Marvin's heart was beating faster than it had for years, and his mouth made a closer shape to a smile than ever before. He would always appear very depressed before this moment. Marvin's concentration increased. As a time where such a thing felt impossible, he was wrong. Marvin stood up as quickly as he could. He was ready for a hug, a massive one, the best hug of his life. He stepped forward towards the young girl and looked down in his happiest face, ready to take her into his world, his planet of love, his hideout of happiness. He reached forward to pull her inside. But this girl, afraid of what this behavior meant, screamed and ran away, leaving Marvin to stand in silence. He looked down at the ground for a while, where the girl once stood, but he soon moved his eyes back up. They began moving back and forth at the same speed as before, and his concentration had been lost. It took a while for Marvin to accept this. The happiness could not possibly leave. It needed a home. But regardless, it was slowly drifting away, as if it were leaving an old man's home embarrassed that had been knocked in the wrong door. And of course that man was a hopeless loser, waiting for that attention for years and begging for it not to go away. He looked back and realized that another man had already taken his seat on the bench. Then he cried, just as he would cry every single day at the exact same time. "Well?" the young man asked him. "I don't like this one," I told him. He was standing behind a desk. At least 12 million video cameras sat behind him, and they all looked just a little bit different from the rest. Printed in clear letters on each of them was the word taper. It referred to some made-up name for a camera, as well as the store's name, Tapers. "So, you want a better one?" he asked. "Because if that's the case, look for yourself. I'm a tad busy." "This one looks good, though. I just don't like it," I responded. "Do you have a better one that looks exactly the same?" He scratched his head, then turned around and scanned the area behind him for a matching camera. A few seconds later, he turned back around, this time with a sarcastic smile. "Sorry, but I'm only here for 3 more hours, not 3 more years," he said with a smirk. "Could you try harder? This is important to me." "Well, see," he began, "I've got 3 more hours here before I go home." "Home? I'm sure you have nothing to do to attend there." "Well, yeah, I do." What do you need to feed a fish or something? I have a family, actually. Multiple fishes? No, they are... There's like a weird distortion in the character set there. Also, I think they're purposely leaving it vague who's talking right now, because so far the person who's looking for a taper, I guess, here has only been referred to as an I. So yeah, we sort of transition roles after the Marvin line up there. I'm gonna take a quick sip of water. Alright. You don't understand, I told him. This is important business, and I don't think anybody honestly cares about these fishes of yours. Letting them starve for one night will not bring life to a screeching halt. However, if I don't get my hands on a decent camera, then the likelihood of that happening will suddenly begin to increase. Oh, threatening. The man behind the desk looked down, assessing the situation. He turned around again, took another look at the wall of cameras, then went back to staring down at his desk. Shouldn't be difficult to pick it out yourself, he said, pointing to my direction. I thought about this suggestion. It made enough sense to be worth giving it a shot. I began. You're ticking me off. I've got to admit, but okay. He sighed and sat down in the seat below him. I looked over at the cameras, all synced peacefully with each other. Despite their difference, there were black ones, green ones, magical ones, inside-out ones, all together in one store. It was amazing. Some of them were the strangest things I've ever laid my eyes on. It didn't even matter to them. Nothing mattered. Tapers was full of wonders like this. Every time I stopped by, I would notice something interesting about the store, something that could apply to real-life situations. You could tell that these were symbolic on purpose, and that the owners of the store were intelligent, deep people with clear goals, people not even related to cameras at all. I looked further down and saw exactly what I wanted, the perfect camera, almost identical to one I was holding in my hand. Looking back and forth between them, I was sure of this. There, yes, I love it, I shouted, pointing down at the camera. He picked it up and put it on the desk. I placed my own camera on the desk for comparison. This is the same exact camera, he said, but it isn't. Look at the label, you silly man. He turned the new camera around. On the label, like every single camera in the store, taper in large letters. But below that was another word that did not appear on the printed anywhere on the older one. Waterproof. The man behind the desk continued to look down at the camera. He turned his head over to the window. It was pouring rain like mad. Oh, he replied. Yeah, I replied. My other one is broken, as at 20 minutes ago. After having bought the camera, I threw the other one to a nearby garbage can and ran out the door. Sir, he said. There was a silence. Please, sir, he repeated. I don't appreciate you placing that camera in there. You see, that's my personal garbage can. I left the store before he could finish. My precious camera immediately became soaking wet. This time it was not a problem. People were walking all about, unsuspecting, and I was about to enjoy myself. I had always loved rain. There was something about being wet that felt like fun. And combined with my greatest hobby, albeit a new one, as I only started a few weeks earlier, it was fantastic. My head was filled with ideas, but none of them were good enough for this. They would have disqualified me anyway as being planned ideas. I welcome the limitations, though. They were exciting. I thought about the possibilities. Perhaps I could film hundreds of tiny clips and combine them to create the illusion that something else was happening, though that wouldn't have been allowed either. The idea was, unfortunately, for me to film something real. So I'm going to make a personal note, pause away from the story for a second. This last paragraph made me think a lot about Petscop. Anyways, let's go. Let's see. Silly Billies. The problem was that real was the opposite of fun, and I perceived that to be an entirely objective thing. You couldn't have both at the same time. It was unthinkable in my mind. For some reason, I was up to the challenge regardless. I began filming absolutely nothing. People walking on the sidewalk, cars passing by, a dog or two if I was lucky. Something a few of those dogs would be wearing hats, but unfortunately that didn't happen this time. I almost have the urge to ask somebody if they would dance for me. I turned to the left and looked into the distance. Somebody was coming. I pointed my camera into that direction and stepped away. As this person came closer, I could see her more clearly. I could tell that it was a female, but nothing else yet. To entertain myself, I built up some suspense. Uh-oh. Who could this be? Golly, this will be great. What will happen when she gets here? Murder? Let's find out. This felt pretty depressing and pathetic, but I kept at it. Maybe I could jump out and scare her. No, that's stupid, I thought. There wasn't much time left, and this was getting less suspenseful by the moment. At that point, I could see her well. It was a small child. Nobody that I should have been messing with. But I kept the camera on her, and even when she passed me, I continued to follow. I wondered where she was going, and thought that maybe, if I was very lucky, it would be somewhere amazing. She looked back for a second. I tried to act casual, but it was quite obvious that I was following her. She began to run. Realizing this, I ran as well. This continued for a solid 30 seconds. Suddenly, as she was running, she disappeared. Not like magic or anything. It was my own fault for momentarily looking away, but she was gone, and I was left standing there, confused. It was very frustrating. However, I caught a short glimpse of her on my fabulous taper. She was running into a house, the one to the right of me, and closing the door. It seemed like I scared her a bit. This made me feel guilty. I realized what had happened. She was walking home this whole time. Nothing interesting like I thought. How disappointed. Well, maybe it was disappointing to the audience of my movie, but it wasn't quite as boring to me. I walked to the house and took a nice look at it. Very familiar. It was small, just as I remembered it. Seemed like it was kept clean for all those years as well, though I hadn't bothered to peek inside, so that was yet to be confirmed. But it was neat to look at. It seemed pretty odd to me that I have never even bothered to pay a visit after all this time, but there I was. Things hadn't really changed. Clearly, the little girl lived in this house. That realization kind of shocked me, and it took more than a few minutes to accept it as true. Very strange. Apparently, that was my daughter. Alright then, I said. Okay then. I didn't really mean to say that out loud in the open, but it sort of came out. Alright then. Okay then. That's a perfect thing to say in this situation. It just doesn't matter anymore, is what that implies. Okay then. I accept this. Alright then. I walked home without a thought on my mind except for okay then, alright then, okay, alright. And that is the closing of chapter 1. Of course, there's 20 chapters, so that's like 1/20th of the story here. What are your guys' thoughts early in? I've got a few of my own. So, I'm keeping in mind that this story is now a decade old. It was written in 2009, of course by Tony, who is the creator of Petscop. And you can already see some of his stylized things and writings that were present in Petscop, even in this earlier work. Of course, again, I'm going to repeat this is not canon to Petscop. It's just more that apparently these characters and this idea evolved into the Marvin and Care that we see in the Petscop story. Still, though, I think it's very interesting. Even if there's a little bit of some quirky writing styles, and there's a few things which I've noticed, and a few little errors and all that, it's fine. I also misread a few things, of course, but I'm going to warn ahead of time what might happen. This is actually a true story. About an hour ago, maybe about 2 hours ago now, I was eating sushi, and I accidentally rubbed chili oil in my eyes. It was incredibly painful. The reason I bring this up is in the middle of reading that, I have to rub my eyes there because I'm still recovering from it. And so I'm sorry if I misread some things a little bit more because my vision got a little bit blurry, but I wanted to wait till the end of the chapter, so yeah, I'm enjoying it. Alright, then, let's get ready for chapter 2. Assign, alert, and go. Into tapers. Takes another sip of water, and we'll be good to go.
Crisis.
Also, this song isn't quite as atmospheric as the last one.
The most profound.
I'm not even sure who are the character we're following is right now. I guess they're the taper, but then is Taper Marvin? I mean, he was confused who this girl was, even though he later clarifies that the girl that he was following was his daughter. And then he knew the house that she was running to, so it's a little bit strange.
Where you see.
All the same, all the same.
I see.
They don't refer, there's just a kind of sudden shift. It could be the same person, it could be a different person, it's not clarified. Alright, let's do this. Chapter 2. Hundreds of feet above the ground, and an inability to fly. It felt like flying, though. There wasn't much else to call it. Maybe falling would be more suitable. Yes, she was falling. Which way was down? It certainly couldn't have been below her, as she wasn't following in that direction. She wasn't falling up either. Somehow, the word direction did not seem to apply here at all. Could out be considered a direction, or is it just a destination? In this world, this tunnel rather, perhaps there existed no concept of position or direction or destination or being, and perhaps it didn't matter. She was falling, though. That's what she felt, and that's where she assumed. From one end the day before, descending into the other end the day after, the future between them a tunnel, one of many. Outside of them, the rules were clear-cut. Inside of them, even a genius could not begin to predict the consequence of his own thoughts. She continued to fall. The end of the tunnel was near, and it grew nearer. The light, growing even brighter, took over. "Care," a woman spoke up. "Wake up." The door was open, and nobody was there. The woman seemed to have walked off. Of course, it could only have been one person. The girl was laying in her bed, which lay next to a window, and allowed her to stare into the sky. She rolled out of bed and walked out of her room. It still felt like she was dreaming. "Mom," she said, speaking into the darkness. "Yes, Care. Yes, come lay down," her mother replied again in a soft voice. She wasn't clearly visible, or it was too dark. The little girl walked slowly down the stairs, careful not to trip and fall. The last stair was always the difficult one, so early in the morning. Was it indeed the last stair? Was it worth taking the risk of assuming there was no next stair? What would happen if she were wrong? Surely enough, she tripped. Her body fell down towards the floor. There, however, was no floor directly below her, only more stairs. She fell flat on her face. Her mother giggled. "Get up, Care," she said. Care pushed herself up and made it to her feet. She waited for her mother to continue, but a moment or two passed before this happened. "So, Care," she began, "I just want to talk to you. You can get ready for school after we're done." "Okay," Care responded, nervous and shaking. This kind of thing didn't normally happen. Her mother reached into her pocket and pulled something out. She held it up. It was a watch. It was a greenish color and looked complicated. Care tried to make sense of it, but couldn't. "Put it on," her mother requested, her voice losing its peaceful tone. She handed the watch over to Care, and Care put it on her wrist. She still couldn't quite understand it. "Why?" Care asked nervously. Her mother paused for a moment to look around the room. "Forget about it," she said in response, looking away at a small clock hanging on the wall at the other side of the room. "Keep it on, though." "Okay." Care's mother stood up and paced around the room, thinking of what to say next and how to say it. She stopped and looked back towards her daughter, still thinking. "I saw you last night," she said, "by the house." "When?" Care asked. "Coming home from school. You were running." Care didn't respond. There was a long period of looking back and forth, both of them unsure of what to say. Don't worry," her mother said, not looking directly at her. "You only caught his interest. I just wanted to warn you about him." "Warn me?" "Never let him near you again, or near this house. I want you to hide next time you see him, alright?" The room was quiet for about 10 seconds. "Alright?" Care's mother repeated. "Alright, Care? Are you listening to my voice?" Yes, alright," Care agreed. "Great," she said. She walked over to the wall and flipped the light switch next to her, bringing happiness back to the room. "Start getting ready." "Yeah." Care ran back upstairs, still shivering as much as before. Her mother sat down at an old wooden chair next to the window, and uncomfortable as the chair was, it brought back too many memories, and she feared that the act of not sitting on it would be disrespectful. Disrespectful to who? Maybe somebody that she once knew. Out there in the past, thinking of whether he would exist in any form in the future, even if that form was an old wooden chair next to the window. It was scary outside. The window was nothing but a mirror, one that somehow reflected fears, not light. There was nothing out there but pain and suffering, the kind that she didn't want her daughter to experience. But there was little choice for her. There was little choice for anybody. Maybe she couldn't save her from every bad person in the world, but she could save her from one of them. She continued to stare out the window. Care came walking down the stairs, trying not to make a whole lot of noise in fear of attracting her mother's attention. She sat down on the last stair, the light making it certain that it was indeed the last. Looking down on her watch, it appeared to be some time in between 12 a.m. and 12 p.m., but again, she could not understand this watch, for it was far too complicated. "He was filming me," Care said, breaking the long silence. Her mother turned her head and gave her a puzzled expression. "What?" her mother asked. "That guy," Care said, after first clearing her throat, "he had a camera and was using it on me." "Using it on you?" "He was chasing me with that camera in his hands, like some sort of camera monster." Her mother stood up. "Care," she began, pausing to think about what had just been said to her. "Really, I mean it. Hide." Two short, chubby men sat down on the bench. The first one had a newspaper in his hand. He pretended to read it and looked around at the people surrounding him, possibly waiting for somebody to arrive. The other man fell asleep the moment he made contact with the bench, perhaps never having noticed the man next to him. Marvin walked silently to the bench. He tried not to look disappointed after finding it completely occupied with little fat men, one of which was making poor use of its services. He stood behind the bench, focused on the school. To him, the school was a greedy little bastard with no appreciation. There it was, filled to the very brim with beautiful children, the smallest, the cutest, the very best on earth. And yet, what was it thankful for? Nothing, it seemed. He grumbled there, standing by the bench, wishing for a different life, a life with a different body, and a bench to sit on. Perhaps he could talk to that young girl, have a conversation with her, and come over to her house, then sleep next to her forever. Maybe he could laugh with her and all of her friends in that pleasant little school. Maybe he could learn with them, play with them, live his childhood. Maybe he could stay like that for the rest of his life and never be unhappy again. Marvin tried finding a comfortable position next to the bench. Even if he could not sit on it, he could pretend. One of the fat men stood up, putting down the newspaper. "Hey, you," he said, looking over the bench at Marvin. "What?" Marvin replied, standing up. He wasn't very used to talking to people, and he always sounded like his throat was destroyed in a marvelous explosion years ago. All that was left was a cough that wouldn't go away and a voice that could never fully understand or comprehend. The fat man glared at him. "Get away from the bench," he said. All right, Marvin responded and stepped away. The fat man sat down and returned to his newspaper, a smirk on his face. Marvin peeked at his watch, hoping for good news. Only a minute until 3. He stood uncomfortably for that slow minute. The bell rang from the inside of the school. The buses had pulled up, but from this view they didn't bother him in the least. He noticed the entrance to the school as the door opened and the kids ran out. Marvin felt like he was floating, like there was nothing above or below him, only in front of him. Fantastic. Those little boys and girls were not recognizable. Marvin didn't bother to remember them. He could barely remember himself. However, there was one recent exception. A small girl came walking by, alone again, among groups of children that continued to laugh obnoxiously. Not unlike any other day. She was different from them. She was special. There was something right about her. The perfect little child that caught Marvin's attention for the second day in a row. He couldn't bear to do it again. He could not come up to her for a hug, as he did the day before. That was humiliating. To go through that again would be far too much. He had to do something with this energy. The children were running off, almost gone, almost invisible. Not much time left. All the happiness, every hit of it, was about to go away once again. The one little girl was watching, though. She was interested. She continued to stand there, looking in his direction. The fat man was watching. He knew. This was Marvin's chance. He didn't want this to happen, but it was indeed happening. The energy was taking over. This had only happened once before, but this child, this horrible child, she clearly had something planned. Marvin was shaking uncontrollably. He couldn't stop. He didn't want to stop. Hey, the fat man said. He looked up at Marvin with the most terror-stricken, concerned face you could imagine. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? Marvin replied angrily. What's wrong with me? Do you really want to know that? Was that a serious question? The fat man stood up. I don't think it's safe for you to be around here. Why don't you go home? Home? Marvin asked. I came here for this bench and I didn't get it. Then I wanted to relax next to this bench, didn't get that either. And now you're denying me the right to stand outside? Please, it would be better if you're all the same. Why can't you be more like them? Marvin said, pointing towards the children behind him, all watching intently. He gained confidence after looking at them. But, Marvin continued, I'm going to be the better person here. I'm going to leave right now. Oh, the fat man said. He almost sounded disappointed. Thank you. He attempted to shake Marvin's hand, but Marvin ignored it. Marvin walked off, waving to the kids while doing so. They waved back and cheered for him. That one girl was still silent, though, just as she had always been. The fat man laughed awkwardly, saying back down to his seat and picking up his newspaper. He continued to pretend that he was reading something interesting. Marvin felt better, one step closer to earning the respect of kids. However, something bothered him. He couldn't get that one girl to cheer for him, or even wave to him. The only one who was actually important didn't seem to care, and yet she did care. Why else would she have stood there staring at him? This was too much to think about. There was one big choice here. Wonder for the rest of his life what could have happened, or follow that girl home tonight. Wow. That's... Marvin said to himself. How silly an idea. Why in the hell would he do that? Looking behind him, he could see her. In all of her beauty, there she was, walking home. She was looking around, seemingly in fear, as if some horrible monster was going to come up out of the depths of nowhere and attack her. What kind of monster would be around here? Without thinking, he began walking towards her, trying not to be noticed. Every light in the house was off. The television was off, the radio was off, the plug had been pulled on everything. The darkness filled the room, creating a depressing atmosphere to add to a house previously thought depressing enough. All of the walls, floors, and ceilings were purposely painted black years ago. The windows were purposely broken. The entire house looked like it had fallen apart at any moment, on purpose, of course. The windows were wide open, so were the doors. The cold settled into each and every room, adding to the depressing mood, but also forming a chilling one to add to that. Stepping into the house would have made you cry. Kara's mother did this to prove a point. She did it to gain attention, to feel powerful, to make anyone feel as if they were stepping into a horror movie in which she was the evil one, the murderer, the one true horrible person, the woman to be feared. Nobody dared start an argument in this house, or they would soon feel her wrath. And it wasn't just an act. She moved slowly towards the living room windows and checked outside for the 11th time in the last 10 minutes. Nothing. Looked around the backyard. Nothing. She wasn't hiding from her then. She looked back at the clock. 3:11. Much too late. Finally, she sat down on her old wooden chair and watched the front yard. 3:12. Great. At least the house was prepared for her. Kara would know right away that there was going to be problems. Out there in the cold, coming inside to even more of it, and it was darker in the house than it was outside. She would notice that. Her mother continued to sit, worried, sick, waiting. A shadow came into view. It was Care, calm as ever, ignorant as ever. A fool to be here so late. 3:14. Perfect. Care could see her mother through the window, standing up from her chair, glaring at her with that familiar face. The lights were off, the door was open, and from out of nowhere the house looked trashed. Not again. Care walked inside nervously and reached for the doorknob. "Don't you dare close the door," her mother said intimidatingly. Care walked away from the door and leaned against the wall, looking down at the floor. She waited for her mother to continue, responded, then pointed at Care's arm. "Look at your watch." Kara looked down at the watch. All she saw was a bunch of little lines, ones that meant nothing to her. It was like a clock, but the numbers were incomprehensible. She looked up. I can't read it, she said. What do you mean you can't read it? I can't. It's a stupid watch. A stupid watch, huh? That's all it is, she began. Okay, yeah, forget it. She started walking around the room, pacing back and forth, looking around. Look at the clock on the wall. Do you understand the one, don't you? Yes. What time is it? Like 3:15. 3:14, her mother said. Now, tell me, when do you leave your school? When does the day end for you? Kara sighed, realizing what this was about. She looked back down on the floor. 3, she said with a guilty voice. 3, her mother responded. It took you close to 15 minutes to walk home. It shouldn't have taken 5, less than that, at the very least, at the very most. I stayed for a little, just a little. Something happened. Oh, really? Yeah, her mother said. I bet something happened between you and this camera monster. Am I right? No, I didn't see him. Yeah, sure, didn't see him, she yelled. I'm sure that's what happened. Didn't see him. Who did you see then? His evil twin? Kara looked angry and puzzled. Oh yeah, Mom continued. I forgot. He's the evil twin. I didn't see him. Go to your room, Kara. I don't care about your filthy lies. Kara grumbled and ran up the stairs, stomping her feet hard on the way up to show her anger. Mom walked back to her chair and sat down, not bothering to close the doors and the windows. She continued to look outside. Camera monster, she whispered to herself in sort of a mocking manner. What a silly, silly kid. And that's the end of chapter 2. I'm actually going to be honest, even though there's a few things about it, I'm finding myself getting intrigued as we continue to go through this. We get to see more from, I guess, Kara's perspective and her mother, and it's not clear right now if the Taper and Marvin are one the same person or if they're different people. It could also be, like, she suggested something about twins, so maybe they're twins? But hey, we'll find out. And also Kara's mother seems like she's got her own stuff going on, to say the least. Alright. Let's go on straight into the next chapter. Chapter 3. One last sip of water, then let's do this. I'm not sure if the watch is Chinese or if it's just like it doesn't have numbers, or if Kara's like 8. So maybe she just can't read it, so. And also, I noticed that whenever they talk about Care or Marvin or anything, they don't use I pronouns. They use like a different type of writing style. Whenever it's the Taper, it says I and stuff. So I'm assuming that the primary perspective of the story is from the Taper, which I guess makes sense because the story is literally called Taper. But I guess that's the way to tell whenever you're watching the perspective of the Taper, because it switches to like I type of things rather than names. Anyways. Chapter 3. It's not raining today, I said. Yeah? The Taper's clerk responded, looking outside. You're right, it's not. He looked around, both back and forth, between me and the window, waiting for me to continue. Well, alright, I began. As long as you understand that. Now, another one, are you? He asked. Oh, of course I am, I said. It's not raining today. That old waterproof Taper is overkill now. I winked at him. Not for any particular reason, but as a sort of signal to him that we were cool and he was part of my respected people list. He didn't take it as that, and instead looked at me in an even stranger way. I kneeled down next to the walls of cameras to get an even better view at the bottom row. The good ones were always on the very bottom, and now that I think about it, that was probably some kind of clever symbolism. Again, these guys were very deep, smart fellows. I wished for the day I could shake their hands. A bit disappointed, I stood back up. Hey, I said. Yes, the clerk responded. Sorry to be a bother, I began, but you don't happen to have a camera that looks similar to my waterproof one. The clerk rolled his eyes. Her window would not close. I've also noticed that there's like 2 spaces in between when the perspective changes suddenly. Like, it's just, you can tell because I guess there's like 2 spaces, then it changes. It's very subtle. yeah. I'm also just imagining the Taper character just kind of hanging around the building and going into big old spills where he just gets really creepy with the clerk because like comes around every day. It's like, very clever. I want to shake your guy's hand. Hey, it's overkill to have a waterproof camera. Leans over, winks. Just being like this weirdo at the store all the time. Anyways. Her window would not close. Kara already tried with all of her might to close it, but it would not budge. She was never able to open it either, and yet her mother did that without a problem, it seemed. Unfortunately, it was cold that night. Very cold. Her bed was positioned next to the window. It was usually a good thing. Every night she would stare into the sky, waiting for something to happen, something different. Or perhaps she didn't want that to happen at all. Maybe this was the only place that stayed pretty much the same, unlike everything else in her life. It was quiet in this empty room. There was not a whole lot that Kara owned, other than a group of small dolls that had sadly died long ago. She used to be given a new one every Christmas. This stopped happening, and instead her mother would give her a fit every Christmas and rip one of her existing ones apart, telling her that it was dead and it was time to grow up. Her room consisted of 2 separate halves, the sleeping half and the deceased doll's half. The dolls were arranged in a circle, holding hands, missing various limbs. Of course, by now she knew that they were never real. It was more of a relief than anything. In the other half of the room, there was a bed. That's all there was. Other than that, the room was utterly empty. Kara was yet to earn her possessions back. The window was not going to close tonight, that was for sure. Kara gave up and collapsed onto her bed, shivering. There was noticeable lack of blankets on this bed. Her mother, in her fit of anger, had taken those away. Fortunately, there was still a pillow. Even more fortunately, there was still a bed. She looked up at the ceiling. The black paint seemed to be growing darker with every passing night. By the time she was convinced that this was no illusion. Behind it, Kara remembered, was a layer of bright green paint. It covered the entire house. It covered her life. She hadn't seen a tiny speck of bright green on the walls since then. Maybe it would have made her feel warmer if the green were visible. She knew this was silly. Paint was just paint. It did nothing but paint. In her dreams, though, she would picture the black paint peeling off, all of it at the same time, falling to the floor in one clump. Everything in her life was fine after that. Nobody was angry, and the green would show through not only the walls, but everyone around her. Someday, maybe. Kara sat up and looked out her window, her open window. She observed the houses surrounding her. The windows were closed, the lights were on. None of them were painted black. They were different. Or normal, rather. Completely normal. Those people were happy. They held in their delicate hands the remedy, and they were sharing it amongst themselves. Marvin figured, and again there was double spaces, so we're switching perspectives again. And yeah, her mom does suck. Alright. Marvin figured he wasn't going back home that night. He found a seat next to the window and sat down on the grass. He checked the time. It was getting a little late. Maybe he was overdue for some rest. Rest was always the answer. He had his day planned out, believe it or not. Marvin pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket, held it up close to his face, and read the words he had previously written down on it. School. Yes, indeed. He should have been there for a much longer time, but he was planning on staying on that bench, which did not happen. Marvin felt the anger coming back. The large, fat man telling him what to do, making him go home. He obeyed that man. He couldn't help but think of himself as a coward, someone who couldn't even stand up to a fat man, let alone his greatest fears. Those were an even larger threat to him. In fact, those fears were beginning to show up at this very moment. He continued to read off the paper. Walk home, lay down, sleep. These things that also did not happen. Those might have been better choices, but he still could certainly have turned back. That wasn't what Marvin wanted to do, though. There was something different that he wanted to do. It was the perfect time for it, the perfect place for it, and he would probably get away with doing it. This struck him as being incredibly absurd. In fact, having gone this far already, he was disgusted with himself. He turned around and looked towards the windows in back of him. It was open. The lights were off in the house. Nobody was around. No, please no. Marvin got up. It was time to quit thinking entirely. Nothing good was coming out of it, and his thoughts scared him more than his actions did. And his actions weren't very pretty either. Stop it, he told himself. Shut up. Nothing was stopping him. Nobody was after him. Nothing was going to happen. It was perfect. No, he thought. He screamed this repeatedly in his mind. No. He held his hands over his ears. It would not stop. Marvin had been struggling with this very problem during his entire walk. Nothing out there would make the thoughts stop, and nothing out there would stop him from acting on them. Trying to do something about it was like attempting to lift the sun with your tongue. There was actually not much of a relation between those two tasks, but they were both very difficult nonetheless. He had visions of people walking by, terrible people, staring into his thoughts, looking inside of his brain and laughing for the rest of their lives. Hundreds of little men hungry for secrets, the most unbelievable of them, the kind of people that paid attention to. Marvin was afraid of his secrets. This would not be the first time that they were fed. However, that wouldn't happen anymore. Not at all. Marvin thought about this for a while and considered the choices involved here. He would leave right now, or of course he could stay and go on with his business. Either way, he was determined to make this the last time he would ever set foot outside. This was certain. Leaving his home in the first place was a mere habit, certainly not necessary by any means. The difference between these two choices of his, therefore, was not a matter of going home or not. It was a matter of what he should take with him on his way there. Silence now, silence. He acclimated to the silence. The silence meant that it was his turn. Marvin looked out the window. Just enough space. He pulled himself inside and his feet met the floor. It was surprisingly cold. Looking around the house now, it seemed every window was open. Marvin was concerned. If someone got there before him, this would have all been useless. He crossed his fingers. He was standing in what looked like the kitchen. The entire house was pretty much a gigantic mess, but that kitchen was really something. The fridge was half open. Pots and pans were lying on the floor next to one another. Less kitchen-like items, such as broken light bulbs or torn papers. The papers were blank. It seemed as if they were spread on the floor on purpose. A baseball bat lied on the floor next to him, with pieces of broken glass surrounding it. Next to both these things were a table with a lamp on it. It had been tripped over. I messed up a little bit there. I'll reread that line. Next to both of these things were a table with a lamp on it that had been tipped over. It was as if they were baking babies in here, and the babies struck back. It's a very weird comparison. Next to the kitchen was the living room, or what looked like a living room. An empty wooden chair stood by the window. Beyond the window was our lonely, dark world. Out there, he could see a man by the house. Marvin could tell by a quick glance that the only motivation behind this quick stroll through the neighborhood was pure hunger and greed. He knew what hungry people looked like. They took pictures and wrote on papers. Some of them had video cameras. This man had a video camera. So we're establishing that the Taper and Marvin are not the same person. Marvin quickly moved away from the window. Feeding the hungry was a bad idea. He waited, and after only half a minute, he heard the knocking. This man was after him. Marvin thought about it. Would it make sense for this to be happening? Is this something that would be possible in our world? Would it be socially acceptable for him to react to the situation in a particular way because he had something in mind? More knocking. He sat on the floor and waited for this to pass. It would end. There was always an end to everything. Knock, knock. Marvin repeated to himself over and over his favorite numbers. He made a list of them. The list hung on his wall, but he had them committed to memory. These numbers were all even. He would not allow an odd number in his list, for those were far too evil. 4, 8, 14, 18. He continued holding his head down in fear, hoping it would all go away. 44, 48, 84. The knock was louder now. It didn't stop. The door was breaking, the door was breaking, and the door was breaking. The door was going to break. The door was not going to be in one piece because the door was going to break, and the door was breaking as the door broke. The knock, another knock, 4 knocks, 8 knocks, 14 knocks, more knocks, speeding up now, speeding up now, speeding up. Louder, the door was breaking. Marvin ran up the stairs, tripping several times along the way, finally to collapse onto the floor when he made it up there. It wasn't going to stop. The noise, though, it was filling the house, and he knew that if he screamed, nobody would hear. It was relieving, but he did not take the chance. The door was breaking, the door was breaking. Up on the second floor, there was but one room visible to him. He stood up and walked towards the door, then grabbed the knob and turned. He opened the door. Inside was an almost empty room. If it was not for a bed and a collection of little dolls, Marvin walked over to the bed. It was not empty. How wonderful. How beautiful. He reached for the girl's hand, grabbed it, and held tight. At the moment, the knocking stopped, and it was quiet. Completely quiet. Marvin felt as if he were waking up from 10,000 dreams and brought into the new world. Nobody was at the door. Nobody was ever knocking. The door was fine. He almost cried. It was time to go home. And that was chapter 3. So obviously, as we know, that, as they even say at the beginning, but also if you played Petscop, Marvin kidnaps Care. Big surprise. But this is definitely a chapter where it's occurring. Definitely some stuff surrounding it all the same, though. Alright. Which means the next up, we got chapter 4 to go for. I'm also going to switch up the music for a second. Alright. I'm going to take a sip of water, then we're going to get to chapter 4. Okay. Whatever was not yet finished would be finished. If this never happened, there would be nobody on the other end to pick it up, nobody to receive it, nobody to care. On the other end, everyone was eager to see the results of long, hard work, people slaving away for hours on end, or perhaps only one person, perhaps none. The stories that told of these tales of creation had their own tales behind them. Stories upon stories. Naturally, you will add your own experience to the pile. Would they be told? The end of the tunnel was near. Tunnels were limited. You can only pass through so many of them, and when you finally run out, there's nothing that you can do about it. The tunnels are behind you. What then would be the fate of this project, without enough tunnels to work within? There was something that needed to be built, a happiness engine. Care had slaved away on this project for many, many years, but there was not much time. Outside of these tunnels, work could not be done, but within them, she could build anything. But how many tunnels would there be? How many dreams could she possibly have left? The end may have been near. She wouldn't have known it. Parts, pieces, bits all around her, scattered about, waiting, talking in thousands of languages, specialized, made for the communication of one thing to another. In this particular case, a piece or a part talking peacefully to their handler. Care was proud to be a part handler. Every night she would be the handler of thousands of pieces, assembling them together into her happiness engine, communicating each and every little language. She was a master of these languages. She knew every word by heart, and could say them all simultaneously. But she was alone, with nobody to compare herself to. Everyone else was out there, in a different tunnel, building a sadness engine, adding to it every night. If you're unsure which engine you are building when you sleep, it's probably the sadness engine. She wasn't always alone, building this thing, but recently as the outside world began to tear apart, her life inside of these tunnels was ruined as well. Her family took pride in this goal, to build this engine as Care envisioned it. But that was part of her life was over. Maybe it never happened. That wouldn't have been very surprising. Putting these pieces together was easy, but time was limited. If there was one more person around, one more part handler, maybe that would have been possible. Standing up, Care looked around the room for a small, flat, circular piece. None of them appeared to be in that shape. There were square parts, some triangular parts, but no circular ones. If it didn't exist, why did she need it? It was easy to ignore, and indeed... Oh, sorry. I accidentally clicked mouth. Actually, this chapter's really short. Putting the pieces together was easy, but time was limited. If there was just one more person around, one more part handler, maybe this would have been possible. Standing up, Kara looked across the room. So, we read this part, so I'm going to skip to this part. Yeah, this chapter's actually really short. It was easy to ignore, and indeed, that's what she did. But at the same time, at some point, that round piece was going to be necessary if her dream of building the happiness engine was an unusual conversation with it. These were all spoken in different languages, one for each individual piece. This conversation, however, played out a bit differently than the others. This piece told her that it was time for a change. It told her that the only logical choice would be giving up and to try something new. It's all going to be useless, it said. Nobody's going to help you. There will be no benefit from a happiness engine, because at this point it is far too late. Of course, he did not speak in that language, and there was no complete one-to-one correspondence between his language and our own. Kara didn't understand this. She ignored the suggestion and returned to her work. This engine was going to be perfect. Kara couldn't believe anything else. That chapter was really short, so let's go right into chapter 5. Actually, was that... I guess that was chapter 4, so... Chapter 5. She woke up in a chair. Surrounding her was what looked like a classroom, dressed up to not look like a classroom at all. A chalkboard on the wall in the very front of the room was partially blocked by a shelf. It appeared to have a few words written on it, and maybe part of a drawing? It was clear that the chalkboard had not been used in years, and that was what remained on it simply wasn't erased. Some of the words were readable. Another began, add, for, soup, was written on it. Probably just the first half of a larger word that happened to be covered up. On the shelf were a few books and things. A large desk sat a few feet from in front of it, with a chair pulled under. The desk was covered with seemingly random objects, scissors, mirrors, papers, magazines, and even a couple of marbles. On the corner was a rotten apple. Maybe it was put there recently to add to this old classroom theme. A closet to the left of her, with a door partially open, was filled with small school desks. The chairs were in there too. Kara was sitting on a chair, identical to those. It felt like it was going to break at any moment. A few markings were made on it, mostly random doodles, but some were profanity as well. The chair was sitting in the middle of the room, facing the larger desk and chalkboard. She was positioned awkwardly on the chair, sitting very close to the edge. I was covering my eyes for a second again. I got some chili oil in them earlier, so it was making my vision a little bit blurry there. Yeah. She was also tied to that chair with a rope. Outside of the small classroom, beyond the walls in which Kara sat between a number of quiet but intimidating footsteps were heard. As they approached her, these threatening sounds, she rocked back and forth in her seat. Not that it was... sorry, this wasn't fun. I'm having fun with my chili oil soaked eyes. Okay. Not that it would have moved with her, for after a closer observation, Kara noticed that this chair was in fact glued to the floor. Thus, there was no escaping from the situation, wherever the situation may have been. Faster, harder, these steps became. Next to her was a door, the knob of which was beginning to turn. She didn't quite know what was going on, and maybe it didn't actually matter. There was a possibility here that, in the minutes went by, a slow but steady transition would take place. A transition between now and later, between danger and safety. Some powerful force would push it all away, every last bit of it, and only Kara and her bed would be left. Certainly that disgusting chair would be gone, and so would that doorknob which continued to turn. As the knob came to a stop, so did everything else, and not a noise was heard for the next couple of seconds. "Hello?" said Kara. She didn't feel in control of her voice. As a direct response to this, the door shot open and slammed against the wall. The knob came flying off like it was already loose. A man came stomping into the room, a horrifying smile spread across his entire face like this was simultaneously the greatest and worst day of his life, and that he was trying to hide the sadness by taking advantage of the extreme happiness. The joy was uncontrollable, and it looked like it was about to burst out of his forehead. He also looked very eager, a little too eager. He turned towards Care and his mouth opened wide, like he was feeling in the mood to yell something. It was overwhelming, this situation here, and only one word could leave his mouth. Yeah! He held his arms out wide, like he was ready for a hug. Care tried to scream, but it just wouldn't happen. Instead, she just stared at him. The man came walking towards her, the smile still not leaving his face. He looked like he was thinking of something to say. "This is my life," he screamed, looking around awkwardly. "Hello, kid." Care didn't say a thing. The man at first decided that he would wait for a response, but soon gave up on that strategy and continued. "No," he began. "Who are you?" He continued to look around the room, waiting. Still no response. In fact, Care looked like she was about to cry. The man widened his smile, shook his head, and walked to the back of the chair. He held both sides of it and rested his head on the top, looking down at Care. "This won't do," he said. Silence. In the distance was the faint ticking of a clock in the corner of the room, hanging on the wall next to the chalkboard. Each tick was louder than the last. "My name is Marvin," he continued. "Please say hello." Nothing happened. Care held her mouth shut. "Say hello," he repeated, irritation in his voice. As the clock continued to tick and the silence built up into something increasingly powerful, Care felt the need to explode in her chair. She wanted to do this for several reasons, some of them old and some of them new. It didn't actually need to happen here necessarily, it just needed to happen soon. This explosion had to be spectacular, it needed to cause death, and something else had to clean it up. "Say hello," Marvin screamed, shaking the chair with all of his strength. Still nothing. Everyone had to know about this explosion. It needed to be on the news. It needed to be a major story. There had to be fear associated with it. All of this needed to happen. This was just one of her dreams, one of many others. She was still young and foolish enough to have remaining hope, though perhaps it would never go away. "Hey!" Marvin grabbed Care's head and shook it as hard as he could. Tough one. Marvin knew at the moment what he wanted to do, but it was too much anger, too much frustration. This couldn't have been done. One of Marvin's problems was anger. He had absolutely horrible anger issues, and yet even in the midst of his fit, his mind would be there giving him the facts. "No, you can't do that," it would say. "That is wrong. Rethink this." Usually it worked. Sometimes it didn't. Luckily, in this particular fit, all was good. This was a different person after all. Someone that Marvin trusted. She was not evil. She was not hungry. She was but an innocent, scared child. What was there to fear? He let go of her head. She let out a scream, but Marvin quietly ignored it. He never quite gained his smile back, but the happiness was once again flowing in. "Nothing was wrong here," he repeated to himself. He even said it out loud. "Nothing is wrong here," he said. "Nothing is wrong here." That wasn't completely true. The door was broken, for one thing. He also couldn't possibly have left his home again, not after what had happened. It was pretty bad. The situation, at the same time, the best thing that could have ever taken place. This was Marvin's dream, basically. He never specifically dreamed of it, but surely he would have eventually. It was difficult to decide whether or not to make a good choice. Only time would tell. He made a good choice. He began walking over to the table in the front of his room. Up against the chalkboard, it was filled with various little objects, some of them useless, some of them fun, some of them strange, but that pretty much is the same thing as fun. His hands moved around the surface of the table, and as if feeling for something. Similarly, his eyes moved back and forth, scanning it. As he grabbed for something at the corner of the table and about to fall off even, he decided that he found what he wanted. It was the long, thin object. No, that's not it, he thought. It was just a pen, and a weird one at that. Put it back and continued looking. Care simply stared forward as this happened. Nothing seemed to be on her mind anymore. There wasn't much to think about at this point in time, and in fact it would probably have been better not to think about anything anyway. She watched as this strange man scanned the table. He pulled up another object. It was similar to the one, and this one was a weird, Caratronic, but no, it was the same thing. He laughed for a second, probably feeling silly for taking so long to find an object on the table. He held it up as if gaining a better view of it, It appeared to be a syringe, complete with a needle and an odd-looking liquid resting inside of it. Kara recognized this little thing. She recalled a few specific memories of them. Not good ones, mind you. Marvin's next action wasn't clear. He just waited there, looking at the syringe, thinking to himself, staring into the liquid. It was a bluish liquid. Somehow it looked like it could burn through your skin or separate into 3 solid cubes that would then force themselves down your throat. Luckily, it couldn't do either of those things in reality, but the simple act of showing it to somebody could be enough for quite the scare. After a good while of doing the same boring thing, something different happened. Marvin turned around, still holding the syringe in his hand. His eyes began to rest on Care. They were wide, open, eager. "Hello, you," he said. Care gulped. Marvin stepped forward, and then he walked slowly in Kara's direction, keeping his eyes on her. Actually, at this point, her arm. "So," he began in a quiet, sweet voice, "what's your favorite color?" Once again, he was given no response. Kara didn't even begin to consider saying anything. "No," he said, "I mean it." Nothing. The clock continued to tick. "If you don't tell me what your favorite color is, I'm going to assume that it's orange." More silence. Marvin practiced with the needle, pretending to throw it like a dart. "Orange is my favorite color," he said. He crept over to the back of Claire's chair, continuing to practice with his needle. All of his arm movements were in perfect sync with the ticking of the clock. Claire was ready to explode. Too bad that wasn't going to happen. "I like orange a lot," Marvin continued. "I think that in time you might like it as well. You don't have a favorite color now. I'll give you mine." It was a wonderful experience to talk like he did. Something felt marvelous about speaking to a child as if they were something other than, well, another little kid staying next to the bench. This was parenting here. This was a step above anything he had been before, and Marvin was determined to be the best damn parent he could possibly be. "I'll also give you this," he said, again quietly. It was a loud kind of quiet, though. He immediately lifted up the needle, pulled Kara's arm towards himself, and injected every last existing drop of bluish liquid into her body. It didn't take a whole lot of strength, but Kara did struggle for every moment, screaming her quiet scream and moving about. Whether or not it was actually every last existing drop was pretty much irrelevant. He definitely assumed that none was left, but maybe that wasn't true. Kara continued to scream, and it quickly turned into a cry. Marvin held a hold of her and reached into his pocket, revealing a small pack of who knows what. His hand ventured into it and grabbed something. He pulled out a small bandage. Kara continued her noise. It was hard for Marvin to stay calm at this moment. He tried looking away from the blood, as it was what he considered his true weakness, if only Hen didn't have hundreds of those. He slapped the bandage on Kara's arm, not actually looking away completely, and then let it go of her. The crying faded away, and all that remained was a rapid panting. At that point, Marvin just released a giant sigh of relief. He paced around the room for a little while, but soon decided that it would be better if he simply left the room. And so he walked out, slowly looking back a few times. Kara didn't notice. She was recovering from a state of panic. Maybe it had been better if she spoke to him. Still breathing deeply and loudly, she checked around the room. He was gone. She was still scared to look at her arm, but surely not enough she did. Nothing out of the ordinary, but there was definitely a bandage there, an orange one. She really, really hated that color. Alright. And thus, that is chapter 5. Give me a second. Fortunately, during that chapter, I had some things again, chili oil stuff. I'm going to wash out my eyes for a second, and then I'll be right back, and I guess we'll go straight into chapter 6. Hey there, Jaded. I'm also going to change the song. I was thinking maybe it wasn't that fame for the last chapter. It was fame for the chapter before it, though. Let's try this and get right back into it in chapter 6 of Tapers. Chapter 6. Staring to the television screen did not help. The picture didn't make any more sense than before. In fact, it made less sense. Everything was wrong. Everything. Nobody was going to understand this. It was garbage. I was discouraged for a while. On the screen was a house, a smallish one, laying in the dark. The windows were open, the lights were off. A dark house? Okay, what does this have to do with anything? Unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot else that I filmed that night. As I was walking towards her house, I had my camera pointed downward, taping the sidewalk. Before that, I taped the sky, and before that, I taped my wall. Nice. A wall, a sidewalk, and a house, and the sky. What a great productive day. To be fair, though, my wall was beautiful. And the sky didn't look bad either. The sidewalk was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen in my life, and I've seen some ugly things, but it's the inside that counts. Also, to be fair, the house did have some relevance. My daughter lived there, supposedly, and I didn't film her the day before, but it did feel interesting enough. This wasn't going to win anything. I picked up my remote and began to rewind the tape. The house was still in view. I was leaving at this point, but now I was going to go back to it, knocking on the door in reverse, looking through the window in reverse, probably thinking in reverse as well. Waiting. Last night I was standing by her door, just waiting, knocking on her door, waiting, looking inside, knocking, waiting, thinking, knocking, and I knocked harder, waiting. It made sense that she didn't answer the door. It was late at night. The only reason I myself was not asleep at that time was, well, because I wanted to check on my daughter. I wanted her to smile for the camera. Watching myself do this again in reverse brought the feeling back. I wanted to see her, not just for the footage, but to bring it all back just for 1 second, and to, of course, meet her mother again. That would have made my day. I watched it all unfold. Everything was exactly as it looked earlier, peaceful and depressing, the exact opposite of what I remember from way back then. Then I spotted something. I stood up from the bed, staring into the television. Beyond the open window, this figure walked back and forth. Lag spikes for a second, so hopefully it's kicking back in. Yes, it is. Life at Tapers. Life at Tapers felt infinitely better than life at home. If I could have really lived there, I could have done so. It was magical. Everything about it was magical. If you ever tried to think about the Taper store without thinking of magic, and if you succeeded at this, surely you were not actually thinking of the Taper store. Maybe you were thinking of something else that sounded like Taper store, like Papers More, for instance. There's not a lot of magic involved in requesting for more paper. Even the door looked nice, and a little smile on it, as if saying, "Come on, open me," to each and every customer, no matter how ugly. Everybody was allowed in Tapers. Everybody was allowed to have a taper. Everybody was allowed to annoy the Tapers clerk. And so I decided to go inside, really greet him with a big hello, like I have always done. I opened the door, a smile on my face, and waved. "Hello," I said, closing the door, and then quickly glancing at the wall of cameras. He released one of his giant sighs. Then he looked away like he was trying to ignore my presence. For some reason, he looked especially tapery that day. That made me feel even better about the world. "Come on, where's my greeting?" I said. "I like you, man. You're my favorite taper man." The clerk looked over at me. He didn't appear to be in a bad mood or anything. Perhaps he was just so glad to see me that he needed to refrain from going too crazy. I, of course, understood completely. Okay, yeah, whatever, shut up, he responded, waving back, but with very little effort put into it. Hello, I mean. I walked up to the counter. He looked at me for a second, but then returned to reading his magazine. From my view, it looked like he was reading the Tapers magazine, though there was probably nothing else you could get at the Taper store anyways, as far as the magazines go. And if it were anything but the Tapers magazine, the manager probably would have taken it from him and hit him with it. The clerk tried to ignore the fact that I was staring at him. Hey, I said. He looked up from the magazine, stared back at me for a few seconds, and then spoke. Yeah? He asked, as if waiting for me to continue. Yeah, I replied. I need to talk to somebody about this. About what? Well, he was busy because he really wasn't busy at all. In fact, it was rare for somebody to even visit the store. See, Tapers wasn't expensive, and not here at Tapers. That was bad. The only reason that Tapers was still around at all was the magazine. Everybody loved that for some reason. Camlander tried making a magazine once, but it was hated by pretty much everybody. They never quite understood why this was, but soon happily forgot about it and returned to their store. Regardless of the magazine's success, Tapers was still a largely unpopular store. A fortunate side effect for this lucky clerk was that they would be paid by doing absolutely nothing but deal with me every day. Almost nobody else came in, at least not on days like this. They were all at Camlander having a ball. Sure, I have time, he responded, almost immediately regretting it. I smiled and went on. I stopped at my ex's wife's house yesterday, I began. Just wanted to see her again. I brought the camera. Camera? He asked, hiding his amusement. Were you gonna film her killing you? No, I was gonna film my kid. She's a good girl, but she ran away from me last time. I wanted a second try. Ah. It's for a contest. Anyways, that wasn't the only reason. No, it wasn't. His interest was slowly dying away, and his eyes started moving back towards the Tapers magazine. It was a good magazine, after all. You couldn't help but stare at it. I was also kind of wanting to see my wife again, I said. We had this thing, you know? But I have this weird feeling that she doesn't want me around. Doesn't want you around? My God, why would that be? The clerk said sarcastically, staring into one of the pages. I don't know, I responded, but I saw this guy in there last night. He was kind of big. Big, huh? He asked. He still couldn't get his eyes off the page. Maybe there was a really good-looking taper on it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's a boyfriend of hers. Left the magazine, and he started looking back at me. Nothing, he said. There wasn't much left to think about, but there was definitely many things left to regret. But it was over at this moment. The house was already freezing, and whatever happened couldn't be taken back. Alright. It would always take at least 10 or so hours for her to make anything back, for her to feel regretful. Not to say that she was ever actually angry. In fact, that was hardly ever the case. She didn't have anger problems by any means, and nobody would disagree with me on that. Most of it, instead, had to do with her self-esteem and loneliness. Not that it mattered that what her problem was, nobody was going to cure it. For that to happen, someone out there would need to care. I'm assuming we're saying the perspective of the mother again. Yes, most absurdly, this is not care, and this seems to be 5 characters in the story. Or maybe 4. Yeah, I guess 4. No, 5, because the clerk is in the story. Right. Alright. She had nothing in particular to do on this Saturday morning. It would be almost acceptable for her to fear getting out of bed. Almost. Coincidentally, she really did have this fear. It was a very common occurrence. What she was really afraid of, though, was her daughter. Of course, Care couldn't have actually done anything to her, but the fear was still there. She feared even the thought of starting a conversation with her. The guilt was taking over every single mental process. Nothing could be done. It took a while for this to wear off, probably 2 hours, if not 3, of lying down in bed, but no matter how long, it still didn't feel like enough. She left her bed, making sure not to wake herself, and walked slowly out of the room. The windows were still open. She could tell not only because she didn't remember closing them, but from the temperature inside the house, unbearable. That was a big mistake. She knew it was a mistake because of the temperature, obviously, but even if this wasn't true, even if temperature, it would not make any difference. This was still a big mistake. Leaving the windows open didn't just cause a little bit of cold, it caused something else. She looked around. The house was still a mess. Thinking for a bit, she decided that it would be much better for herself if she procrastinated. She was going to say hello to Care and possibly apologize, but that wasn't exactly something she was looking forward to. And what better way to procrastinate than clean up the house? Of course, what a great idea. She looked up. There was a broom on the ceiling. Perfect. Picking it up was a challenge. She stuck it up there pretty well last night. Nobody was going to get that thing in a million years, she told herself the nights before with a grin on her face. What an idiot. She felt like slapping herself. It was stuck to the ceiling with glue. How nice. After a few seconds of embarrassing attempts, she gave up on getting it. That broom was a piece of garbage anyway. Very frustrating. She began wondering why it was even up there. Putting it on the ceiling wasn't exactly necessary after all. It would have been quite easy to make the house a mess without completely ruining her own life in the process, but no, that's not what she ultimately chose to do. To make matters worse, the other brooms were stuck too. One of them was on the wall, another was on the floor, and her favorite broom, yes, she had a favorite broom, was inside of another broom. I'm not even going to begin explaining how that happened. The obvious next step there would be to procrastinate again. To distract herself from this annoying task of cleaning up her ugly house, she decided to wake up Care and possibly apologize for her awful behavior the night before. It was the nicest thing to do. After all, everybody likes to be apologized to. It makes them feel great. She walked up the stairs, tripping once. You couldn't even walk up these stairs without tripping at least one time, and looked over at Care's door. It was a pretty door, perfectly black like the rest of the house. Maybe it wasn't unique, but that was kind of a good thing to her. The door was also open. Open doors are very inviting. Even if you can't be like Tapers and have a smile on your door, you can go to the next best thing and just keep it open all the time. Camlander did neither of these things, and even though they were completely successful, don't use them as an example. Care's mother didn't like this open door. She saw it as a bad thing. In fact, it was. Care? She said. There was no response. Care? She repeated, looking around her room. Care, are you there? I wouldn't have been able to make the rhyme with a straight face. Care's mother really had no sense of humor, and even when she did laugh, it wasn't at anything funny. I kind of liked that about her, though. Whose perspective are we seeing right here? I was wondering about this earlier because of the mention, of course, of Tapers and Camlanders. But then the eyes, like... This is a strangely... like, I feel like there's something more... Sorry to interrupt the story just to say this, but... like, whose perspective are we looking at right now? It sounds like we're listening to the Tapers guy. Why is he telling the perspective of... the... I'm sure this actually might mean something. But continuing. She stepped into Care's room and looked around some more. A worried look finally showed up on her face. This bed looked absolutely perfect. In fact, the whole room looked perfect. Everything looked great, but there was a missing child. The black walls stared her down, as if chanting, "Leave the room, leave the room," hundreds of times per second, until she finally obeyed their request. The dolls continued to sit down quietly, ignoring the angry walls and going back to being deceased. She could feel the hatred built up in this room. It was overwhelming. Even the bed wanted her dead. See, I found that rhyme to be amusing. If Care's mother had said it, I don't think she would have even giggled in response to it. She walked back down the stairs, tripping, of course, and called her name one last time. Care? No response. I don't think it's Marvin. Like, there's 5 characters to my knowledge. They might have overlap that might be less than we are seeing. There's Tapers, who is the person who says I. There's Marvin. There's Care. There's the mother, who I don't believe has been given a name yet, but yeah. And then there's the clerk at Tapers. And this chapter is following the perspective, or seemingly the perspective, of Care's mother, but it's being told from the perspective of the Tapers guy. There's a few signs that's the Tapers guy saying this, and he's for some reason commenting over what she's saying, but how is he commenting over this? Like, is he present in the scene? Is he rewatching this scene? He does record things. There was also an earlier comment from the Tapers guy. It was actually one of the very first phrases of this book where he says that he would take scenes out of context and make an own story with it. So that does give me some sort of thought, a process of what maybe the story is doing. I could go back to chapter 1 and show what I'm talking about, but yeah. Anyways, that is chapter 6. Finished earlier reading that. There is still 14 more chapters to go, though. We're going to go right on to the next one after I take a quick sip of water. Okay. So, let me do this quickly. And okay, straight into chapter 7. I just want to know your name, said Marvin, pondering whether or not that statement was normal. It certainly didn't feel normal for him to care about what her name was, another pun that I did not intend for, but that was different. But normal for him was not normal for other people. Marvin acknowledged this, and it was a constant goal to keep himself ordinary and to not come off as a lunatic. Maybe it was too late in this case. Marvin was sitting on a chair pulled up next to the small table. On the other side of this table was Care, facing the opposite direction. Care was a little distracted. This was to be expected for the most part. The light had been flickering on and off for the past 10 minutes. The chair was wobbly enough that she could have fallen to the floor at any moment, and to top it off, she was alone in the school library with an unpleasant stranger who happened to possess an abnormally large forehead. Hey, Marvin said, again trying to obtain Care's attention, but please answer me. The room was quiet. Looking around took that feeling away. No matter where you were standing, you were surrounded by books. All of them shouting at you. You could feel the love in this room. They weren't angry shouts, they were actually very peaceful ones. The library was eager and happy. It hadn't seen a child in years, and now it was back in business. Marvin could feel the shouts. They were coming from inside of him as well. Care continued to sit in her pitiful position. Her confusion served to completely prevent her from getting up, or even attempting to escape again. Yes, again. Earlier that day, she had been sitting in the classroom tied to a chair, waiting to wake up, but this didn't feel like a tunnel to her. It still didn't. Maybe it was a different kind of tunnel. She was later taken out of the room by the same man, pulled through a hallway, carried through a couple of other rooms, and placed in the chair she was now sitting in. The motivation for resisting was non-existent. Gone. Nowhere. It took way too much energy, was completely and utterly useless, and only made things more difficult in the long run. Not that Care actually thought this through. She didn't at all. She was just confused and distracted. Marvin needed a new strategy. Simply asking this girl to talk to him wasn't going to make it happen. He stood up, pushing his chair in, and started to walk towards Claire's chair. I keep on saying Claire, but Care's chair. Taking a small smile similar to the one he had on before. It could have fooled me, honestly. Again, I feel like we're not actually seeing Marvin's perspective. Is this the Taper talking about this still? Girl, he began, laying his hand on his shoulder. Talk to me. Care's response was almost falling off the chair in surprise. She landed on her feet, but the chair tipped over and the leg broke off. It was probably going to happen anyway. She stood defensively, staring at Marvin, keeping at a safe distance. "Now, I'm not going to hurt you," he said, after first thinking about his reply. He felt he was doing a good job being normal so far. Care didn't move. "I just want you to tell me your name, sweetie," Marvin said. He felt like taking the sweetie part back, thinking it was a bit too much. "Please, just your name." She still stood there, looking at him. Nothing happened for the next full minute. It was torturous. The clock began ticking. The clock began ticking. Kara looked at it, surprised that it hadn't been working for the last 10 minutes, and now it just suddenly started ticking loudly. The library clock tended to do that, as Marvin knew very well by now. He didn't bother saying anything about it, though, as Kara quickly looked back at him and forgot about it. "Care," she said softly. The room was silent, and even the books quit shouting. Marvin felt like jumping for joy, but he remembered that he was trying to be normal. But this was getting more and more difficult for him. He didn't have a whole lot of experience with normal people, after all. Maybe he was exposed to them during his childhood, but as of lately, he hadn't spoken to many people at all. This was bad, though. A thought of happiness was being built up there, so much that Marvin couldn't quite bear it. It distracted him so much he forgot exactly what she said. "Kara?" he asked. It was quiet. Kara stared at him. "Care," she repeated. Marvin was so excited by this that he forgot to listen for the second time. He felt the need to punch himself in the face. "Karen?" he asked, a little guilty for asking again. "Care," she replied. "Karen? No, Care. Carla, yeah." Care gave up. She sat on the floor, still very distracted. The light kept flickering. "Yes," she said. "Karine, then," Marvin said. "Cool. Man, this is great." He could barely control his excitement. This is what Marvin has wanted for a very long time, and he finally obtained it. It wasn't very difficult either. The next task would be to find some activities. He wasn't sure what to do right away, but he knew that there must have been something. Wait just a second," Marvin said. "I'm going to be right back. Read a book or something." He skipped over to the door, filled with glee and eagerness, and left the room. The clock continued to tick, and the light continued to flicker on and off. Kara was left sitting on the floor, still bewildered by the whole situation. She didn't feel safe leaving from her spot. At times like this, Kara's desire to explode only intensified. Every tick of the clock felt like she was cued to do so. With no possible way to achieve such a thing, she felt helpless and weak. There was no escape. She leaned over on the bookshelf next to her, still sitting, trying to evaluate the situation. The floor was uncomfortable, as was everything else that you could have possibly sat on. It was in the school building. Looking at the shelf, she proceeded to stare at the books. They were no longer shouting, only engaging in quiet chit-chat at this point. Maybe they were talking about the broken chair, how it had lived a long, satisfying life. But maybe it didn't. It was normal for her to feel alone, but for the very first time, she really was. In every possible way, the books weren't actually talking. They weren't even alive. Kara completely understood and accepted the situation. The confusion was gone. She was not imagining any of it. She stood up and took a look at her surroundings. Obviously a library. Not a very big one, though. In fact, the school was very small in general. She recalled being pulled through a small hallway, which appeared to be the only hallway in the entire building. Only about 6 classrooms. A hallway, 6 classrooms, and a library. She saw another door, it probably led to a cafeteria or something similar. Kara couldn't help but wonder. Maybe this was some kind of factory of sadness. It had all the characteristics of one. Not to mention this was doing a damn good job generating fear and misery, and even though it produced enough of it to potentially feed a city, only one person was actually receiving any. Was that unfair to Care, or was it unfair to the city? It was good enough. It was a good thing, coincidentally. Care was on her way to creating the world's first factory of happiness. Experiencing the polar opposite was probably helpful to her. Now, if only she could find the circular piece. Rummaging through the drawers and closets felt like a childish thing. Marvin tried to make it feel childish. There were toys all over the place, just waiting to be found, and they were going to be found. There was no question. He didn't really believe with complete confidence that there were toys in that school, but that was uncertainty. Marvin rejected uncertainty, at least for the brief moment. Would a child be uncertain? Somehow he didn't think so. His fairly limited experience with children led him to the fact, though, that, for the most part, he wasn't completely ready to rely on his own knowledge. This was his favorite classroom. Second door to the right. There were no questions about it. It was clearly a superior room. It had 2 closets, after all. The other rooms had but a single lonely closet, and those closets were already full. Absolutely useless. Actually, one of the closets, is his favorite classroom, was as full as well, but that's the reason why having a second one was so important to him. He had an entire closet to himself. It was great, though oddly enough, he never quite figured out what to put in it. This empty closet, however, was not entirely empty. He opened the door, standing back just in case he was opening the full closet by mistake. He did that last time and nearly injured himself. Inside the closet was a short rope and a flat circular object. The rope seemed to have some toy potential, and the circular object looked kind of like a frisbee. He grabbed them both and closed the closet door, storming out of the room soon after. When he made it back to the library door, he stopped. Not because he was nervous, and definitely not because he was dreading anything. Quite the opposite. He was in a fantastic mood and couldn't wait to have some fun. But he wanted to make a good impression, and his first idea was to work on his entrance. Well, there was a rope and a frisbee here. The rope could possibly have been tied around the frisbee, combining both experiences into an entirely new and original one. Yes, Marvin liked that idea. But what would he do then? Indeed, that idea felt like a dead end. The rope didn't necessarily need to be used. It was just a rope after all. The frisbee, however, was useful. All he really needed to do was throw it. Nice. Marvin was happy with himself. He was determined to spread that happiness. At least one other person would be in a good mood by the end of the day. Immediately, Marvin pulled open the door and screamed at the top of his lungs, "Catch!" He then proceeded to throw the frisbee, not actually paying attention to where it would end up going, but feeling pretty good about himself while doing so regardless. His smile almost completely wrapped around his head, while the rest of his face simply looked away and hoped that it would not be held responsible. It was heavy, certainly unlike your typical frisbees. One of the reasons why Marvin was so proud was his ability to throw such a heavy thing at a considerably far distance. Kara screamed as she was directly in front of it by some strange coincidence. It looked just a little bit too long for her to respond, and the quite rock-hard object unfortunately made direct contact with her face at incredible speeds. She flew back about a foot, and the frisbee fell to the floor. Marvin stood there in awe, at first admiring the strength of his throwing arm, and then quickly began to panic as Kara started to cry. Good morning there, CJ. We have now also finished with Chapter 7. 13 more to go. Stretch out the arms. Alright, we'll take a sip of water and we'll get right into Chapter 8. Nervous Rex scrambled about, hand in his pockets, looking down at the ground, no enthusiasm for anything, hopeless people ignoring the world. Sometimes it felt like they were everywhere. Maybe they were. It certainly wouldn't have been surprising. They thrived on the sidewalks, all marching around at the same lifeless pace, spreading the gloom. For all to enjoy, it was like the world, as well as everything else, had given up on this town. Yes, poor Kara. That's also my impression of Petscop. Poor Care. And I, with the trusty taper, had the pleasure of filming all of them. They weren't happy about it, but then again, they weren't anything. I must admit, when given this task, my first thought was not a positive one. It may have been something along the lines of, "Oh God, why am I doing this?" Or, "Please, they must be joking." Or even, "Why does everybody else seem so confident right now, whereas I sit here and talk about how horrible this place is? I mean, we all live in the same little town. Perhaps this is just some illusion, and I'm the only depressed person here." Tapers were never depressing. It was perhaps the only place where the feeling did not exist in any way, shape, or form. And sometimes they even had music playing. Those were usually good days. Camlander never had music playing. Walking into that store was like crawling into a corner and dying. Maybe that's why people liked it so much. The most that I could have done was tape nothing. Maybe that was the best choice, because other than that, the only reasonable action would have been to give up and forget about it. And that didn't sound like a very good idea, looking back at how much time I wasted. Hint, it's a lot of time. I lifted the camera up and began recording. Eyes getting a little blurry if I get for chili sauce stuff. I'm actually affected by that, so let's see. The beings on the sidewalk took no interest. A few of them looked over and pretended to ignore me, like they were ashamed to have cared about something. I guess that's what I love. That's what I would have done as well if my reputation of being a loser was in jeopardy. That wouldn't have happened to me, though. I don't lose reputations. Still taping nothing, I decided to walk forward with no real destination in mind. More people began to take notice of me and my taper. When that happened, I made sure to zoom in on them and wave. Naturally, they did not bother to wave back, and I returned to my business of walking, doing nothing. It continued to bother me, though. None of them was interesting. Nobody was going to care. At that last word bounced around my head, I was reminded of my daughter, and all my other concerns were temporarily destroyed. I hadn't seen her in the last couple of days. I even waited for a solid 20 minutes, and admittedly I brought the camera every time. It was really beginning to worry me at this point, much more than anything else had recently. She clearly was not going to school, but why was this? Why was she not leaving her home? This was not an entirely selfish thing. While she would have been very useful and satisfied my own desires, I truly did worry about what would happen if it felt like I was losing something that I never had. It also kind of felt like a combination of loss and guilt, and it never ceased to drive me insane every minute of the day. I tried shaking the feeling off. It wouldn't go away easily. Everyone began to look at me funny, as the number of people I bumped into every second increased at a very uncomfortably fast rate. I wasn't expecting one of these people to be my worst enemy. Really, I wasn't. In general, this isn't something you would think is likely to happen, and at the time I didn't even know this man. I had seen him once before, or anything like him, but it felt like his life's mission was to be unlike other people, and for this reason it shocked me that I had never seen him before, like I'd been missing something for my entire life. I will call this man Hill. His clothes were made of metal, and his tie was made of rock. His face was larger than his head, and his eyes were larger than his eyelids would cover. Nobody saw him. Nobody talked to him. Hill didn't like people very much. It was his assumption that he could be seen. People would not like him so much either. He lived his entire life under this assumption. Unaware of this man and his presence in front of me, I continued forward with a distracted look on my face, searching for the answer to my problems. Thinking of Care, the pure innocence, the opportunities was taking over my mind, and the thought that she was gone had taken it over as well and crushed every one of my hopes. He appeared in a flash, staring directly at my face, his eyes almost coming out of his head. I bumped into that face, needless to say. He was angered. I was shocked beyond relief. The pure awe of the situation sent me down to the ground, as did his powerful stare. My taper rested in his hands. Getting up was impossible. I was stuck to the sidewalk, and nobody else seemed to notice. They simply passed by like absolutely nothing was happening, and life was just as boring and hopeless as usual. I felt like pretending the same thing, but it wouldn't have worked out on my end, with a large man forcing me to the ground. "You," said Hill, holding my taper tight, like he was intending to cause damage. It worried me that he would have really done that on purpose. I didn't want to respond to him. Every part of me wanted out of this situation. He continued. "Is there something wrong with you? Get up off the ground." My ability to move suddenly came back. I stood up and looked at him, feeling like a complete fool and ready to leave. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said, trying to ignore the impossibility of what was happening. "I'll be more careful next time." "No, you will not," Hill said in response. I waited for his next action. Surely there was a purpose of what he was doing, I thought to myself, but nothing happened, and I needed to speak up. "Could you give me my taper back?" "Taper?" he asked. He looked around, then at his hands. Oh, he continued, holding up my camera. "This thing?" "Yes," I said, nodding. "Give it back, please. It's mine." I reached out my hands to take it, faking a smile to pretend I wasn't completely freaked out. "No," he said, pulling it back with a smirk showed up on his unbearably ugly face. At the same time, my smile began to disappear. "No," I said, attempting to grab for it anyways. "That can't be right. You're going to deny me my own camera, my pride and joy?" Hill didn't look happy about my response. "Pathetic. You don't deserve it." He proceeded to throw the taper to the ground, breaking it into possibly hundreds of pieces and making a loud sound that was naturally nobody noticed. I looked back and forth between Hill and the camera, trying my best not to go mad and attack him. "Yes, okay," I said, kneeling down to pick up the pieces. "If that's how it is." As I moved my head downward, he took advantage of my current position and stepped on my hand, laughing. I struggled to get free, but he only continued to laugh. "You're a fool! Hopeless! Useless!" he said, still very amused. I continued to struggle, and that made him laugh even harder. Not a single person was aware, or maybe all of them were aware. Maybe they were all on his side. It seemed like a good guess at the time. "Yes, that's right," he said, his voice fading away. "This is where you belong. Trust me, and mark my words, you will never get up again." Nothing seemed to happen after that. That's a very peculiar scene. And there's a few suggestions of a few things here. Like, does that guy actually exist? Are people even ignoring the scene? I've got some questions. But that was Chapter 8. Alright. Which means next up we have Chapter 9. Alright. Gonna prepare myself, because it looks like this one's a bit of a long one. But that's fine. Let's get this through and do this. I might read half of Tapers now and then read the other half, I don't know, maybe tomorrow at some other point. So I think I'm going to make my way to finish up to Chapter 10, and then I'll decide from there. Alright. But for now, Chapter 9. Chapter 9. The lump was starting to become a kind of a bother. For some very peculiar reason, it was actually a little bit bigger now, and in a completely different place. Yes, it had moved, and it didn't take long for that to happen either, a mere 2 days. It appeared on her arm at first, and eventually grew large enough that it was fairly noticeable from a far distance, which is annoying enough, but eventually decided that it wasn't very comfortable on her arm, and would be much happier somewhere higher up, and so it moved on its own. Her watch was the only one making this transition more uncomfortable, and so she was forced to put it on her other arm. Imagine if you could, like, move your injuries. Like, I guess a bump in this case. That'd be very strange. Okay. Kara didn't really like that lump. She hated it, in fact, but whenever she tried to show it off to Marvin, he would respond with something like, "That's cool," or "Wow, it looks like it's gonna explode, you better watch out." He wasn't a good person to go to, needless to say. The problem was that nobody else existed, for all Kara knew. Anything outside the school building was irrelevant. She didn't see herself stepping out there ever again. Not that she didn't want to, she just didn't have a choice in the matter. Marvin wasn't much of a help to Care, sure, but if ever Marvin needed something, Care would be the first to respond and follow orders. Least he resorted to doing unimaginably cruel things. It wasn't clear what these things were, but they were most certainly going to happen if she wasn't on her feet every second. She could endure him and his behavior most of the time. "Hey, Carolyn," Marvin said, waving for her attention, the door only half open. At the time, Care was just about asleep, though not quite, in what was supposed to be her bedroom. In reality, it was just another classroom, probably the one Marvin considered the worst, located next to his favorite with the two closets, possibly the smallest one at the time, and looking forward to sleeping on his own comfortable bed. Not that he would have put much thought into it any other time. "Hey, come on," he shouted eagerly. Care was still pretending to be asleep, though failing. "I know you're awake," said Marvin. "I could surely and absolutely fearlessly sense enthusiasm from the whole other side of our school." Marvin had a strange way of speaking. He would often misuse words and talk in cryptic ways that even he himself could not understand. His use of the word fearlessly is a good example of this. Not only did that not make much sense in the context of his sentence, but he didn't even intend for it to make sense. It's a weird and complex thing, and maybe it would be better if left a mystery. Fortunately for Marvin, that worked to his advantage. Kara was so caught up trying to make sense of it that she forgot what she was pretending to do. "What?" she asked. "Good," said Marvin. "Get out of bed. We're going underground." This statement astonished her even further. "Underground?" she said. "To the basement," Marvin replied. "Get up." Kara sighed. "Oh," she said. He was clearly in a good mood that morning, as he often was after him. When that happened, though, yes, he was mad. Usually he would just get disappointed, not infuriated, but that was almost as bad. "Okay, follow me," he said, pulling Kara out of the room. It didn't feel much like following to her. He took an immediate turn to the left, towards the end of the hallway, which was just a little door. Karen noticed it before, but it never actually occurred to her that anything was behind it. He ran in that direction, making it to the door, and turned the knob anxiously. The door opened. Marvin took a moment or two to stare inside. "Look at that," he said. "Isn't that sufficiently?" Kara didn't listen to him. She was too busy looking down as well. It was a stairway leading to what she assumed was in the basement. At the moment, it was too dark to see anything. Marvin stepped in first, pushing Claire aside, afterwards pulling her in with him. It was still incredibly dark, but he didn't hesitate to run with full speed down the stairs, dragging Claire along the way. He let go of her halfway down, and she stumbled. "We're here," he said. He moved his hand along the wall for a few seconds, searching, then flipped a switch. The lights turned on. Claire covered her eyes and tilted her head downward. "What are you doing?" asked Marvin. "It's bright." "So, look around." Marvin did so himself. It was a pretty room, being a basement and all. In one corner was a large cardboard box, probably filled with garbage. It almost spilled out. In the other corner, or closest to the staircase, was a closet and a couple of shelves. The shelves were almost empty. The closet, Marvin remembered, was completely empty. He theorized that the large cardboard box may have been filled with its contents a long time ago. Still, it didn't actually matter to him. On the opposite side of the room was yet another door. It was blocked by a couple of stacked chairs. Care, her eyes still covered, blindly walked in that direction of this door, believing she was moving towards Marvin. Marvin ran over and stopped her, turning her in the correct direction. "Don't go in there," he warned. "In where?" "That room," Marvin said, pointing at the door. Care turned back around and moved her hands away, glancing for half a second, then quickly put her hands back. "Why not?" she asked, not actually that interested. Marvin decided to change the subject. "So, He began looking around the room. You like this place? Care wasn't sure how to respond. She almost certainly didn't like it, but was there a wise thing to say? It's okay, she mumbled. Okay? Marvin asked. Just okay? Are you sure it isn't conventionally hallucinatory? Huh? I don't know, Marvin said. But what could I do to make it better? Cara shook her head at him, lifting her hand away at this point. What does that mean? He asked, imitating her gesture. I'm not sure. You're not sure what it means? Cara shook her head again and cleared her throat. I'm not sure how to make it better, she said in a very quiet, tired voice. She tried to make eye contact, but couldn't do it with the light shining so brightly. Oh, said Marvin. It was quiet for the next several minutes. Marvin continued to walk around the basement, looking under things, behind things, on top of things, like he was looking for something incredibly important. Maybe he was. As interesting as that is, it didn't make much of a difference to Care, who was just about ready to explode from the sheer boredom of this adventure, not to mention she was kind of tired, having just woken up. Though, even if she was neither bored nor tired, her desires wouldn't have been a whole lot different. She still would be pretty much ready to explode. As she was getting ready to sit down on the staircase, her eyes couldn't help but notice the flat circular object on the top shelf next to her. The same one, actually, that hit her square on the forehead only 2 days ago. It wasn't just any ordinary frisbee, though. In fact, it wasn't even a frisbee. It was something much different than that. And she wanted it. Since the moment she first saw it, this has been true. Unfortunately, that little incident kind of distracted her. Maybe she could have caught it if it hadn't been moving so damn quickly. Marvin ran out of things to look under. He turned around and glanced at Care, who happened to be paying most of her attention to someone that wasn't him. Clearly, she was staring at one of the shelves on top of which an object sat. Oh, yeah, he said, walking towards the shelf now. I forgot to put that away. Care stood up. No, she said. Marvin was opening the closet door as she said this, ready to place it inside with the same gentleness as everything else. It wasn't so much for the object's sake as it was for the closets. He had an unhealthy obsession with closets, sometimes felt sympathetic for them. What? He asked. She began holding her hands out. She wasn't quite sure what to say right away. Can I have it? Marvin was a bit befuddled by this request. You want this? He replied, holding it up. Yes. Why? I just want it. Marvin laughed. Well, you can't just want it, he said. That's approximately silly. Please? She asked, holding her arms out further now. Marvin shook his head, smiling. I can't do that, he said, laying that flat object down inside the closet. He's waiting. Who? The closet, he replied, closing the door. Now, let's go back up. There's nothing really to do here. Care nodded, though very slowly, but as Marvin walked away, her eyes did not move. He noticed, as he was walking up the stairs, that she was not following him. She was a little busy staring at the closet, the closed closet door, not even making the smallest movement, just standing there in what looked kind of like a state of shock. This troubled him, slightly, not because he cared why, but here. Care turned around with an unhappy, thorough, somewhat monotonous expression. Almost ghost-like, actually. Monotonous, as I should have said it. Almost ghost-like. She drifted down to the stairway, looking out at the floor. Oh, wait, said Marvin without even a jolt of sympathy. Shut off the light first. Care didn't like what was going on. She didn't like it at all. Her entire life's dream was about to be broken, and there was absolutely nothing that she could do about it, except mope, of course, which she was already doing a good job at. Not that it was getting Marvin's attention. He didn't have a very easy time reading emotions, unless we're talking about closets, in which case he was very good at it. It was quite unfortunate because the consequences of misreading emotions were colossal, and I don't mean for Marvin. Now, Care did have a chance earlier to retrieve the object that she wanted. A couple of chances, actually. She could consider this to be her own fault, but that didn't seem to occur to her at the time. "All right," Marvin said, as they both walked out of the basement and into the hallway. "What do you want to do with me?" Kiera didn't like the sound of that question, or the tone in which he said it, but she wasn't in the proper mood to worry. "Nothing," she said bluntly. Marvin stood in shock. "Nothing?" he asked. "Nothing at all? Are you sure about that?" "Yes," Kiera responded. "So you're suggesting we sit down, preferably in the library, though it's your choice, and not even talk to each other?" Kiera shook her head and faced Marvin, still with a blank expression. "That's something," she said. "I want to do nothing." Marvin was perplexed by the situation. He never heard a single thing like it before. Nothing? Absolutely nothing? What is that? How do you accomplish such a thing? You must always be doing something. It drove him mad, the idea, and so he disallowed it from entering his brain again. Okay, yeah, he said, pounding his head with inconsiderable force. "Sure, you do that. Nothing. Okay." It distracted him so much they walked off in a fit of complete and utter disarray. Nothing he did would stop the thoughts, and so he decided that it would be better to rest for a while and think about something better, something a little more useful in his life. Kiera felt accomplished, but it didn't do much to cheer her up. She walked to her classroom depressed and disappointed, although surely enough when she got in there, she did nothing. Alright. So we're currently at chapter 9 of 20, and we're about to read chapter 10. I'm going to make chapter 10 the last chapter I'm going to be reading today, and I'll probably read the other 10 chapters another time pretty shortly. Alright, stretch out, and let's get ready for this. I'll share my thoughts of so far once we get past chapter 10, so let's go. Chapter 10. Back again, let's see. Are we at Tapers? No, this is Marvin Care. "Back again, are you?" said the small rectangular piece. Oh, wait. Oh, no, this is Care's machine that she's making. "Back again, are you?" said the small rectangular piece, a smirk on his unattractive face. He was sitting in his usual position, refusing to fall into place as was expected of him. Nothing would convince him that he was a worthwhile endeavor. In fact, maybe it wasn't. That, however, was not exactly the point. Kiera tried language after language. None of them would accomplish what she wanted, to communicate with one specific rectangular part in a way that proved to be beneficial in swaying him. She assured herself that this was the only problem, that somehow she could not get through to him, that he didn't understand the big picture of what she was doing. There had to be some language, some out there that would allow her to convey this idea precisely, and if such a language did not exist, then maybe this was all hopeless. She almost couldn't comprehend that possibility, but maybe then one problem existed, and if any of them got in the way, then this would be over. Perhaps it already was. For that moment, though, she just decided to ignore all those problems and focus on the easy stuff, putting the engine together with the pieces that she had. "You could be doing better things right now, you know," said the piece, lying down on the giant sofa as Kiera worked. "Please reconsider. I almost feel embarrassed for you already." "Shut up," Kiera said, concentrating on the hundreds of pieces lying before her. They were all very similar, though unique at the same time. They were similar because they were all parts of the same thing. This happiness engine that Kiera designed years ago, set off to build. It was a tough project, and this would probably take countless years to fully complete. However, she had already spent 5 years on it. How much longer could it have taken? The pieces were unique in that each was an entirely different shape than the last. You could even begin to compare them. Such a comparison would be a waste of your time and money. Yes, money would be necessary. You could describe the language in which they spoke in the same exact way. If somewhere out there was a machine that would receive the shape of any object as input, analyze it, and generate a language based on information, then these languages that Kiera spoke could possibly have been output of the machine. The piece watched as Kiera completely ignored him. She wasn't even trying this time. Look, he said, I'm being stubborn for a reason. It's because I'm right. And the sooner you figure that out, the better. Stop talking, said Care. She wasn't gout. No, she wasn't quite. She wasn't quite in the mood that night. This piece turned around and tried staring at the ceiling, which didn't actually exist for a little while, but soon grew bored of this and looked at Care again. Come on, you have to give up on me, Claire, it said. Yes, I agree, she responded. You agree? Yes. The piece didn't quite know what to say. He seemed to have gotten what he wanted, only to find out that it wasn't actually, he didn't actually want it that much. It definitely wasn't as satisfying as he had expected. You win this time, he said in a grouchy tone, but I'm not letting you attach me to that damn machine. Kara didn't respond. She was busy having a conversation in a completely different language. The new piece was flat and triangular. His language consisted of simple 3-letter words and 180 unique symbols, all of which represented the same sound but required a different number of eye blinks. It took a long time to communicate in this language, which literally drove the rectangular piece insane. He was currently in the need of a little more attention. Didn't feel he was getting it. Kara started laughing as to the triangle. Hey, said the rectangular piece. They continued to laugh louder now. Hey, he repeated. What are you laughing at? The laughter continued. The rectangle stood up from the sofa and walked towards Kara angrily. I'll have you know I'm no fool, he said. You are not going to persuade me. Kara still didn't listen to a thing he said. The laughing wouldn't stop now. Somehow, even as life outside of the tunnels grew worse and worse, when she was inside of them, she could still manage to sit down and laugh at a good joke. And it was a really, really good joke. She couldn't even begin to imagine. My. The triangle happened to speak a language very well, suited to jokes. This was the exact opposite of the rectangle, who had absolutely no way of expressing a joke in this language, and thus had no idea what a joke even was. The rectangle felt completely excluded, but he knew that they were talking about him. He was certain. Hey, you guys better, he began. He watched as the triangle, delighted and excited, and was placed flawlessly into a spot in the happiness engine, like destiny had brought him there. It was all that the rectangle could take. Well, the laughter continued. The triangle was inserted, and an entire section of the happiness engine lit up. A milestone had been reached. And of course, in complete awe, the rectangle sat down and stopped talking. Kara stood up, proud of herself, and the work that she did. It was halfway done. And there we go. And I also get the irony that her saying that is halfway done with the story. 10 out of 20 chapters accomplished. And yeah. So far, okay. So I'm going to just express some thoughts for a second. We've been reading this for about 2 hours now, and we are about halfway done. Right now, my reading ability is taking a little bit of a hit, which is why I'm stopping here and not reading the last 10 chapters right now. Firstly, I can say this. If ignoring the Marvin and Care names that make it even more obvious, if I read this and were not named after Marvin and Care, there's some particular parts of this that you can definitely tell it was created and written by the same person that wrote Petscop. Like the Ryan style's a bit similar to how like Rainer and all them, and of course Marvin and Care, talk within the game itself, and you can sort of tell it's the same writer, given this was before Petscop, and so this is like an older Ryan style thing. And again, it's technically not canon to Petscop, but you can definitely see how the ideas from this translated into Petscop on account that a lot of these qualities are also in Petscop. The taper is gone, I guess, though Petscop is about a series of recordings, but it's of a Let's Play video game thing. Marvin and Kara in the game, as is the school, but the school sounds a little bit different. In fact, the two main settings of this story are the two main settings of Petscop. Well, two of the main settings that you kind of go towards, which is Kara's house and, of course, the school. Now, in Petscop, it's very clear that Marvin is Kara's father, and that he abducts her into the school basement. In this, it sounds like Kara's father is the Taper, and it doesn't sound like the Taper is Marvin, though it could be Marvin. It's not exactly clear yet, but... There's also some weird character things, like it sounds like the Taper is seeing all the events. I guess he's somehow taping everything and modifying the footage. Because the biggest example of this is when he's talking about Kara's mother and her response to find out that Kara's missing. And he leaves some commentary on that. However, there's also other bits there where he sort of, like, inserts weird comments in between the conversations between Marvin and Care. So, I'm going to say this, even though it's probably a little bit of a strange thought. I think the only way that this makes sense to me is that I think the mother, Care, not Care. I think the mother, Marvin, and the Taper, all three of them might be the same person. But maybe not. But there's also, the reason why I'm saying this, earlier there was a strange comment by the mother, where the mother talked about trying to protect Care from one single person. And then she said something about an evil twin of the guy, but then she said that the guy with the camera was the evil twin. Which implies that there was some sort of meaning behind that, but she didn't elaborate any further. The comments by the Taper sometimes are overlaid with the comments of Marvin and the comments of Kara's mother. Not to mention that Kara's mother, Marvin, and the Taper all have strange idiosyncrasies that they have with each other. Like, there was a moment where the Taper starts talking like the I knocked and I knocked and I knocked and I knocked. And then it's similar to the way that Marvin said the thing about, you know, how he started like panicking and the door was breaking down, the door was breaking down, the door was breaking down. They were written in a very similar style, but it was supposed to be from two different perspectives. And I know that there's a singular author here, but I feel like that was intentional. Now I do know that they talk so that we see that the Taper records like Marvin, like the guy inside the house, but I feel like there's some deceptiveness to some things that are happening here, and it's a little bit hard to tell if everything. We obviously do not have fully straight narrators telling the story here. Now it could just be as simple as something else, but it's a little bit weird that the Taper gets to leave some comments on Marvin and Kara's mother's side of things, almost like he's there, but then it'd be impossible for him to be there unless he was them. But yet the commentary of them is separate than the characters, which, you know, just some thoughts there. But then how Care responds to them is a bit weird. Like, Care acknowledges her mother and the man following her with the camera to be two different people. So there's that. And you would think that her mother and this guy with the camera would not be the same person, but there's a few weird idiosyncrasies about that, which I'm just trying to think about. It's also, I'm going to be honest, I know not to take this as canon to Petscop, because it's not canon. I understand as a creator, he wrote this story in 2009 and then expanded on the idea, and probably aspects of the story changed as he went into Petscop, so it's important not to take this as canon to Petscop, but because it has so many connections to what ended up in Petscop, it's very hard not to compare it to that and think about what that could mean to Petscop's overall story, if that makes sense. So it's in a weird state. I think it's weirder because not only are the character names exactly the same, you know, like Marvin and Care, but like the settings are similar, and a lot of the tone of the piece is similar even. So it's a weird case where the setting, the characters, and even the story are pretty similar, but there's obviously key differences as well. So one being that Petscop is a extract, you know, web series about creepy stuff, while this is just a story that he wrote, which is available on his website. Did you guys have any thoughts about it so far? I'm not sure. I'm going to ask that as I'm just thinking a little bit further here. We're not done with the story yet. We're only about halfway through. But it definitely has some pieces in mind. I do kind of like... So some parts of this, I've got a thought where I like some parts of the writing a lot, but other parts I think drag on a little bit longer than they need to. It's not that it's an entirely too long story, but all the same. But then there's also something about the quirkiness of his lifestyle and how the world works that I just find kind of appealing, I guess. It's a little bit eccentric, but in a way that's interesting. Even though the story topic is decidedly a bit morbid, obviously, because it's a story about a guy, I guess, kidnapping a little girl, though the intents of why he kidnaps her, I guess, is just for comfort, as opposed to something violent or sexual. Not to say that justifies it, but just notable. Meanwhile, we've got a man who loves a video store a little bit too much and really likes tapers, and he doesn't seem to be well liked by the people around him. And he's obsessed with this idea of seeing his daughter and seeing his ex-wife again. The fact that he's kind of creepily stalking them. And then we're seeing the perspective of the mother, who is in her own idiocentric, like, she's just kind of caught up with being kind of crazy and, I guess, gluing brooms to ceilings and walls and etc. And also goes and, I guess she has big mood swings because she apologizes for last night, and then she feels like her anger self when she smashes and crashes things is different than her more calm self who likes to clean and be a little more apologetic. So yeah, it's interesting all the same though. Still, that was half of Tapers. I guess we'll get to the other half sooner than later. For now, thank you for tuning in. I will keep this video public. I know I don't make a lot of my streams public, but I'll leave this one public. Hopefully by the next time I read it, my eyes will be a little more clear. I actually had some difficulty reading this because at some points my vision will get a little bit blurry. And again, if I look, I have a mirror right behind my computer monitor. If you don't know that, there is a mirror right there. My eyes are definitely red right now. Again, I was eating sushi, and I was using some soy sauce and chili oil on it. And I stupidly forgot to wash my hands after eating the sushi, and I went to go scratch my eyes with chili oil soaked fingers. That was a very fun experience, by which I mean never do that, please. It is not fun. They feel better now, but they're still a little bit sore in the eye. And I guess the vision's a little bit off because of that. All the same, all the same. It's not a good idea to rub chili sauce on your eyes. Until next time, though, I shall bid adieu to all of you, and I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. Adieu.